Hi, I'm Tia,
And I'm Toni.
and welcome to Emotions Unscripted. So, we're finally getting started. First episode. It makes me think about how both of us can be very perfectionist and anal about some things, even though I don't claim to be anal. And finally being able to kind of press that record button and getting started.
Definitely looking forward to getting started and, talking about our emotions.
So, one of the big things that I was looking at and getting started with the podcast was there's only so much of a reach that we have when it comes to like the therapy room, both of us being therapists and clients, but we have a very limited availability in terms of how much time that we have to be able to help people. And when I thought about the podcast, I was like, we can reach a larger audience than just the 20 or so people that may pass through our doors or across our screens throughout the week. And so being able to reach a larger audience in terms of tapping into their emotions and kind of reconnecting with themselves, it made me really excited about that. So, but I also think that it's funny that we went ahead and decided to start recording today because I had this crazy dream last night that really connected well with what we've already been talking about, all of our side conversations and stuff. And so I wanted to kind of tell you about the dream that I had and how it kind of ties into the whole reasoning behind why I wanted to do the podcast. And so I don't remember like tons of it, but I I think I remember the parts that are significant enough to be able to draw the connection or what I was supposed to remember to be able to take something from it. And it's weird because it took place not at the current house that I live at, but the old house that I used to be at, where where my parents also lived. And and in the dream, my dad and my mom were sitting outside, like in my dad's truck, and my mom died probably about 5.5 years ago now. So the fact that she popped up in this dream was also interesting to me. But as I thought about it, I know why, and we'll get to why. But I was coming back from a trip with just my younger two kids, and we were getting out of the car, and I'm pulling all the stuff out of the back. And it's really weird that it wasn't like in suitcases or anything. And I was like, why is my clothes not in suitcases? And so I'm pulling it off out of the back of my car, and I'm taking stuff inside. Now, I don't remember actually taking anything inside. It was like a quick, like, kind of a scene switch where it's like now all of a sudden I'm in the kitchen. I'm walking like towards the sink, and I hear my kids making this kind of commotion, like maybe it was like something was going on. And I turn around, and as I'm turning around, I see like this guy, and he's like in his black hoodie with the hoodie up, and he's like charging at me, and he rams right into like my left side. And I wake up at that moment. And I was like, what the hell was that? And I kind of like peeked my eye open a little bit, looked around to the side, didn't see anything. And I was laying on my stomach. And so now I'm awake. I'm laying on my stomach. My back's out to the room. And I start to get this little panicky feeling. Now, the panicky feeling, and I know this because I remember when I was younger, I had this dream, and I always say it's when Abraham Lincoln came and visited me. And what happened in the dream when I was about 9, 10 years old, I was laying in the top bunk of the bunk beds, and the bunk beds were against the wall, and my back was out towards the room. And this man who looked like Abraham Lincoln came up behind me, tapped me on my back, and told me to jump. And so I remember jumping in that moment. And then I turned around and I put my back against the wall because I was like, I can't be exposed like that. And so this dream that I had last night, it exposed me in that same way again, where my back was out to the open. And that kind of freaked me out. And I remember, and I was like, I went straight back to that time when I was 9, 10 years old. And I was like, oh my gosh, my back is exposed. I need to turn around. I need to protect myself. But then, of course, the therapist in me is like, no, 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 you're fine. Tell yourself you're safe. What do you tell your clients? You're okay. Everything's fine. And I'm like, trying to do this. But in my head, I was like, no, I'm in this big room. My back is completely exposed. And so I gave in to the anxiety or the other fear that I was feeling. I flipped around and I kind of like gazed and like looked around the room. And I was like, okay, everything is fine. But of course, I'm not going to be able to go back to sleep then. Now my brain is like spiraling. I was like, why wasn't I able to kind of control that emotion in the moment? Why wasn't I able to talk myself down? Like I do this with clients all the time, but I wasn't able to do it for myself. And why did I jump all the way back to that time where I was like 9, 10 years old and I had that exact same feeling? But then it made me think about what we've been talking about in terms of when like our body, mind, and spirit aren't connected anymore, when it's not in alignment anymore, we become lost. And I was thinking about like, when was it that I became lost? And I think it was in that time period of being 19 years old, laying in my bed in the dark, Abraham Lincoln coming and tap me on my back and telling me to jump. And that's when fear was invited into my life. And going back to my mom, it makes me think about one of the things I remember when she passed is that I had said to myself, and I was like, I'm not ready yet. And I probably wasn't talking to myself. I think I was more talking to her. I was like, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. And of course, I'm sitting here like, what does that even mean? And I was like, I'm not ready to be a mom by myself. I'm not ready to be an adult by myself. I'm not ready to not have somebody to talk to about the things that I need to know. Like when my kid gets sick, what am I supposed to do? Who's supposed to tell me what to do? My mom was always that person who would tell me what to give the kids or what to do, or if I was feeling a certain way, she was the one who provided that. And then she wasn't there anymore. And I think I kind of locked in on finding other ways to kind of feel that safety net. But all through my childhood, she was there. And so I felt that fear when I was 9 years old. But it wasn't something that was just like right in the forefront of my mind all the time because my mom was there. My dad was there. And then as I got older, I always filled that spot with other people. But now in this time in my life where I recognize I don't need those safety nets, I took that safety net away and I kind of opened myself up to be attacked. And that's what happened in the dream. Was like you were attacked again,
Mhm.
but it was almost like a test kind of, and not necessarily a you can't handle it and this is why you were attacked, or you need these people and that's why you were attacked. It was like, no, you were tested. You weren't attacked again. And so the dream just really pulled me to that point of we we're kind of brought into this light and we're brought into this world, and certain things will take place to be able to that will like shift us and or reprogram us, and it's not always for the good. And a lot of times what we're seeing is that people are shifting and they're like disconnecting, they're falling out of alignment, and their emotions are being pushed down or they're being spiraled out of control. And if we could just align it all back together and align it back into like a place of connectedness, then the mental health struggles that we're seeing would probably be reduced. But one more thing in terms of like the fear, um, I think that fear was one of those first emotions that I feel like when I'll put it this way. I was reading this book, Convoluted Universe, and they talked about fear, the fear that we had, and how that fear was what pushed a lot of our like natural born abilities kind of down deep, deep, deep into us, so that we were unable to access them anymore. And so I was like, yeah, we became afraid, and we started doing things trying to like compensate or make ourselves feel better, and versus being able to kind of be at peace with like the existence or the turmoil or whatever was kind of going on in our lives. So that's my long story, my long dream of kind of like reinforcing the whole need for us to kind of reconnect to ourselves, to our cores.
Stated, because I feel like we start off very connected and then at certain points in our life we get disconnected, and sometimes we're not able to find our way back to that connection. I feel like that's what inspired this podcast, just really bringing awareness how emotionally restricted we are. And I feel like a big highlight of that was COVID. When we experienced the pandemic, I think people were forced to be still, to be present,
Mhm.
and it really brought awareness to how disconnected we are.
Yeah. It's like we were living in kind of like an autopilot mode. People just go, go, go. And then the universe said, stop. And in that stop, everybody kind of panicked.
Mhm.
And I know for me, I saw like a flood of clients like starting to kind of come to therapy. And I'm like, I don't have any more room. But also at the same time, it's like, we're in crisis. And I'm in the position to be able to guide people through this crisis. And so, of course, I was working like 60 hours a week during COVID. I was tired, but it was that constant, like, people being like aware, aware that they were living in like this little fantasy world. And then the reality hit, and they started realizing that they weren't connected to people the way that they thought they were. They were only connected by a job or a happy hour or something like that. They weren't connected to their family. They weren't connected to themselves. They were just kind of existing. And people woke up and they were like, okay, I want more than just this autopilot mode.
For sure. And I feel like during the autopilot process, people just didn't see those certain things. Like they didn't really hear those subconscious thoughts. It was just go, go, go. And then once they slowed down, I think they were in shock. I think a lot of people were very shocked with, being isolated, not being able to, be out in the real world and be around the people that they thought provided them a safe place. And I think a lot of people realize that a lot of the relationships, jobs, whatever situations just was no longer serving them.
Yeah. It makes me think like when you say like it just stopped, it got quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I always think about that quiet. The idea of having a quiet mind is like terrifying to me because I'm so used to being anxious and so used to like constantly like processing things at all times. And I think for a lot of people, it got quiet, but it wasn't like silence. It was just like all that extra fillers were taken away, and they kind of had to sit with themselves.
For sure. The distractions were taken away. And in that moment of quiet, I think the things that were in their subconscious mind or things that they were pushing out, it got loud.
Hmm.
Like, hey, are you looking at this right now? Are you looking at these relationships? Are you looking at like how you feel about yourself? And I almost see it as like people were looking at a mirror, and the reflection that they were looking at, they didn't really recognize who they were.
Hmm. I think they had normalized it. They had normalized so much of their existence, so much of their thoughts, so much of how they kind of interacted with the world. And then it didn't feel so normal anymore. It makes me think about like if you look at like stats in terms of like mental health, and it says like, well, like 20% of adults are, have mental illness. And I'm like, I think that's only just documented. So the people who have gone to a psychiatrist or been hospitalized or have like a major mental health diagnosis, but then it's like so many other people who are are functioning, but they're not really functioning. They're moving through life, but they have all this stuff that's just spinning around, and it's being pushed down into their bodies, and then finally it starts to come up, and that's when people start freaking out and they don't know what to do, and then they try to push it back down, but it just keeps on coming back up. And I feel like the pandemic, everybody exploded and nobody was able to like put the lid back on anymore. And I think we're trying to do it. We're trying to put the lid back on, and we're like, mm-mm, you have opened it up. Let's
Mhm.
clean it up, let's realign it, and let's move forward in a healthy way.
Mhm. For sure. And I almost see like it being like Pandora's box. Like once that box was open,
Hmm.
you couldn't close it anymore. It's like certain things that you wanted to either be distracted from or not pay attention to. It was just right in your face.
Yeah, all the time. And I remember just like the influx of clients and the things that they were talking about, and that's what it was. It was like, I can't hide from this anymore. And I think that, I don't want to say post pandemic, but in today, um, people are trying to hide again. And it's like, you can't hide. It's already been exposed. We know it's there. And I think that's why we're seeing an uptick in like mental health cases. We're seeing some kind of push here and there for more accessibility to counseling, so that the numbers of people who are out there who are crying for help are able to kind of find it.
For sure. And I feel like post pandemic, like you said, if you can truly say that, people are trying to return back to normal, pre 2020, but I don't think it's ever going to get back to that. Like once that box was open, it's just people are faced with hard truths. And it's like, do you want to heal or do you want to continue living the way that you were living?
Yeah. And so I used to always say this, but then like people started overusing it. But it was like, we have to get to adjust it to the new normal. And I was like, don't say it. I'm like, y'all ruined that. That's what I used to always say. But then others started saying it, and it wasn't as cute anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But it became, what is normal, and how do we want normal to look, and what kind of lives do we want to create for ourselves. And I think a lot of time, like during all that thinking that people did, they realized how much in control they were of their lives, and how their thoughts could shift so much of the things that were happening for them. And that was just kind of a nice revelation for them to be able to be like, I have more control than I think I have. And then there's those areas over there where I don't have control, and it's okay.
I think also too, it's important during the pandemic. I think people were forced to listen to their bodies a lot more. We talk about that mind, body, and spiritual connection. And I feel like the body just doesn't lie. And I think people were noticing a lot of signs, whether it's the lack of sleep or, whatever triggers they were feeling or symptoms they were feeling. I think a lot of it showed up in their body, so they couldn't ignore it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, like in the therapy world, we always say like the body keeps the score, and the body will react in ways that the mind may not be processing yet, or the mind may think you're okay, but the body is just like, it's not okay. And so um, being able to, that goes back to like being able to get it back in alignment, where your body is understanding the same things that your mind is understanding, just that your spirit is understanding, so you can function normally. And but one of the things that I do see is that usually whenever people are starting to have those body issues, that's when we'll see them coming into the therapy room, because, oh, I'm so tired all the time, or my heart is palpitating all the time, or I'm having all these stomach aches, and they probably have gone to, a medical doctor, and the doctor is like, nothing's wrong with you. And then it's like, gotta head over there to the therapist, because it must be something going on in your head.
And one thing I don't think people realize or think of, like we're energetic beings. We hold energy in our body. We have an energy field. And whenever you suppress those emotions, it gets trapped. It gets trapped in your throat or your heart or your chest, and it gets stuck there. And then that turns into that chest pain or the stomach problems.
Hmm.
And we need to find ways to, in a healthy way, to like release that and like let it pass through.
Yeah. But it's uncomfortable,
Mhm.
because even I think about myself, like if whenever I'm doing like breathing exercises, or I may be listening to certain frequencies, I always get this tightness right here in my chest. And I know that it needs to be released. I know it needs to be let out. But then at the same time, it's like, I ain't got time for this. Like, I don't have time to be feeling. I don't have time to be digging through emotions. I don't know what's on the other side. So my anxiety is skyrocketing, because I don't know what's on the other side of letting it out and
Mhm.
it. But I know it needs to be done.
And I think the longer that you try to avoid healing, shows up in your life so many different ways that it gets to a certain point where your back is against the wall and it's like I'm done with this. Like I have to feel better. And I think people are really at the point where they want to feel better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was one of the things that I think it was probably 2022 when clients were doing their New Year's resolution, and it was always like, it's like, oh, this is the year of me. This is about making me happy, getting back to being happy. And the biggest problem with that is that nobody knew what happy was, because we had always been living like this fake happiness or this fake existence. And it's like, I want to be happy. And we're like, okay, let's start working on what does it look like to be happy. And then there's nothing. And it's like, are we happy yet? Or they set these goals that they think is going to make them happy and it's still not happy. And it's like, yeah, because like you're not vibrating in the way that you need to be vibrating, and your energies are still being depleted by the things that you're doing, so your body's not going to feel happy. So even though you may have bought that new car that you were looking to buy that you thought was going to make you happy, it's not, because there's still so much other things that are disrupting your energy.
And you just made a really good point. I feel that, pre-pandemic, a lot of times we could get by with focusing on the validation of external things,
Mm-hmm.
cars, plastic surgery, whatever it is on the outside that makes you feel better. But I think once the pandemic happened, I think a lot of people turned inward and it's like, oh, wow, like I need to fix what's on the inside.
Mm-hmm. And it's hard because in our minds we're programmed that all this external stuff matters. If that person said that you looked nice today, if you were able to get like a promotion, what grades you got on that test, all those external things have been looked at as something that is important. And it's like you're nothing without those things, or you're not as good as what you may have been telling yourself or what your parents may have told you, because now you're facing the real world and the real world says you suck, and so you're internalizing it and you really don't suck.
Exactly. And having that relationship with yourself is so important. And I think that's where the disconnection comes from, because a lot of times I feel that people tie their value to those outside things. They tie their value to the results.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets to certain points where the results don't provide you fulfillment. It doesn't provide you peace. And then you're like, well, what do I do now?
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of my 10-year-old. And it's funny because his birthday is like the day after mine. So we're both Virgos. And I was like, I think you're a broken Virgo. I was like, you're broke. And he's like, what? But he has like such a negative like viewpoint of himself, and he doesn't think that he's good enough. And I'm like, I just think I'm just all high and mighty. I think I'm the greatest thing ever. You're not going to tell me anything different. I was like, it doesn't matter how I do on this or how I do on that or what I face. I'm like, I'm great. And I'm like, I think, like, how did that happen? How did you get broken? Because, like, and my other son, he's also my older son, he's a Virgo too. And he has that high and mighty, attitude too. And so it's so interesting how, like, there's some of us who can kind of float through life and have these internal beliefs that we're just great. And then the others that are just like at this place of, no, I'm not good enough, or I have to do this perfectly, or I have to do that, or I said this wrong. And so now I'm not the person I'm supposed to be.
And you really highlight a good point, because I feel like as souls, we come as we are. We have the tools that we have, and knowing that we're all individuals. Like, I think we should normalize that. Like, the new normal is that we're individuals and we're unique, and we're not like a one size fits all.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of like mental health labels in general, where it's like, oh, you're this, and so you have this, and this, but you're also this, but you don't have this, and this. But we're going to label you the same, even though y'all are completely different people and going through different symptoms. They just look alike.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have that kind of we always try to categorize people versus being able to see that individual uniqueness of each one of us.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like labels can really, tear people down. it can really put them in a box in a sense. And it doesn't allow people to just be their best version of who they are by putting them in a box.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I've seen it over and over again. You put them in this box, and that box then becomes their excuse. And it's like, well, I can't do this, or I can't achieve this, or this interfere with this because I have X, Y, and Z. And it's like, no. And that's like whenever I have clients come and they're like, do you do assessments? I was like, no, why? What do you need an assessment for? Oh, I want to know what I'm diagnosed with. Why? And they said, oh, I just want to know. I was like, you don't just want to know. You want to use it to your advantage for something. And I was like, there's no point in knowing what that diagnosis is, in my opinion. I think like what's important is what are the symptoms that you're having? What are the thoughts that you're having? And let's work on treating those. Let's work on rewriting those. Let's work on creating some clarity there. You don't need that label to be able to work on those symptoms.
And I feel like you're almost like talking about peeling back the layers and like getting to the root of it. Like if it was an infection, you can't just put a Band-Aid on it. You have to clean it. You have to tend to it. And I think, that's what emotions are about. That's what connecting with your mind, body, and spirit is all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that, the whole idea of pulling back the layers, because I'm always talking about, we got to get to your core self. And most people are like, I don't know who my core self is. I was like, I know, we're going to find it though. And it's funny because one of the things I do with clients is like, let's take it back. When do you remember just before you were impacted by anything? This kind of goes back to when I was talking about my dream and that 9 to 10-year-old age group. And it was like, that was when something shifted. Mm-hmm. And so my core self is sometime before that. And I need to figure out who I was then. What were some of the things I was interested in? What was my personality like then before I discovered fear? Before I hit that moment of, I have to look out for myself. As I was saying that, it reminded me of I grew up, halfway grew up, around like horses and things like that. And my dad would always say, you got to get them on the horse early before they develop fear. And because once a kid is like afraid of the horse, they can't get on the horse, and the horse will also feel their fear too, which will make it an unsafe ride for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so his thing was always get them on the horse early before they start to fear that horse. And so it just made me think about, when is that time before we start developing those negative emotions that shift the way that we interact in the world. And that's pulling it all the way back to that core self before we were afraid of things, before we knew danger, before we knew disappointment or anger or, punishment, all those things. Who is that person?
And I love your analogy with the horse, because I was thinking about, what if kids were taught as little people about meditating and their intuition and their inner voice? I feel like a lot of us as adults, we don't listen to our inner voice. We're not connected to our inner voice. And I feel like that inner voice is essentially what allows you to trust in the process and allows you to go through life, not allowing that fear to like hold you back.
Mm-hmm. But it makes me think though about like, okay, if I have this one inner voice and it's telling me these things, but then I have this whole society that's telling me all these other things, who am I going to listen to? So we become like, I hear this voice. It sounds good. It makes sense to me. But it's not saying what everybody else is saying. And I don't want to be different. I don't want to be judged. I don't want to feel bad. And so I'm just going to push that little voice back. And then I'm going to focus on what everybody else is saying. But I would love to see like a bunch of little kids like meditating.
For sure. And I think that that's one thing that people don't realize. Like, you have your conscious mind, which you're aware of, but then you have your subconscious mind, which is affected by your childhood experiences, the news, social media, people's opinions, and all of that is in the back of your mind. And that's where a lot of our limiting beliefs are. So when you're running off an autopilot, you're definitely not hearing that inner voice.
Right. I think I've described it to you before. It's like my control panel. So I see that subconscious as that control panel. And it needs to be reprogrammed. It needs to be upgraded. And right now, it's operating, as you were saying, off of all those experiences and things like that. And it's like, where's the upgrade? Where's the isn't it time for a factory reset or something? But then it becomes, well, how do we do that factory reset?
Exactly. Just like your iPhone, like we're always getting updates, but a lot of us as humans, when did we get our reset? I feel like the pandemic was a upgrade for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it really shined light to where we need to make improvements in our life to live healthier lifestyles.
But then it makes me think about like so many people, how they actually, instead of hitting, yeah, go ahead and update, it's like, postpone, wait till tomorrow, wait till tomorrow. And it's like, no, let's start it. Let's start doing it. And then I was like, but I don't know how to work the phone after it's upgraded. It's like, we'll learn together.
For sure, because if you stay with that same programming, you're going to be lagging. You're not going to have the most updated information. You're essentially going to be stuck in 1999 or wherever your last programming was. But that's not the present you. That's not the current version of you.
And that just makes me think about like how so many people don't recognize how many yous there is. And it's like, yeah, you were this person at this point, and that person went through so many bad things, but you're not that person anymore. You're not that little girl, that little boy. You've evolved, and you can take care of yourself, and you can keep yourself safe. And that's actually what I was struggling with after I woke up from my dream last night was, you're safe, you're okay, you're a big girl. Like Abraham Lincoln's not about to come attack you or anything. But it was a hard reset, and I was like, I have to do whatever I need to do right now to make myself feel safe. But I'm not just going to make myself feel safe, because a lot of people will make themselves feel safe and just keep on going. I'm going to make myself feel safe, and then I'm going to sit back and think about what it is that made it so hard for me to feel safe in that moment, or what was that moment trying to tell me. I'm not going to just push it to the side. I'm like, okay, I'm safe now. Like, no, I need to understand what went wrong. Why was I not able to, comfort myself in that moment?
And a lot of people don't realize, like, you still have these versions of you, your 4-year-old self, your 8-year-old self, your 15-year-old self. So sometimes when you have certain situations that you're dealing with and you feel triggered, it may not even be the present you. It may be 15-year-old you. Somebody could say something that triggers the 15-year-old you, and now you're ready to just be angry or yell or whatever, however you're going to handle it. But I think if people realize that they have different versions of themselves inside, they would treat themselves much more kinder. What would you say to your younger version of you, knowing where you're at now?
Mm-hmm. And going back to like my dream and kind of answering that question, I think one of the things that I was thinking about is that, was that a moment to be afraid, or was that a moment to grow and learn? Was that jump supposed to be in fear, or was that jump a more of, let's move to the next stage. Let's move forward. It's time to progress. And so I would probably tell my younger self to like pay attention to things, and don't necessarily go with that first thought, but be able to really look into it. It's like, what was that moment supposed to be showing me? Because a lot of times we don't see it correctly. Our perceptions are off when it comes to what were we supposed to be seeing in that moment.
You bring up a really good point, because I feel like self-reflection, it just allows you to dig deeper and deeper and deeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I always encourage my clients to kind of do the same thing, but it's hard. It's hard until you learn how to do it. It's hard until somebody can provide you with some guidance. But I think the whole thing with the podcast is just being able to get people to start. Mm-hmm. And to start looking inward, to start exploring those emotions, to allow them to exist within our bodies. They're not hurting us. I always tell people, it's like the emotions do not hurt you. It is the thoughts and behaviors associated with those emotions that hurt you. And so let's let them come up. Let's see what's going on. Let's reconnect to ourselves. Because as long as we're pushing them down, we're disconnected.